Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. Welcome into this Christmas week, this holiday week, and this championship week. Yes, people might be more excited about Christmas, but a lot of us fantasy players, we know that the most exciting time of the year is championship week. That is, if you manage to get to the championship, which will segue us into the congratulate or commiserate section. I'm going to let you know how I did in my three leagues, and then we will go to a listener. So, in my three leagues, as you remember from last week, if you listened to the podcast, I was in all three of the semifinal rounds across all three of my leagues, and I was really hoping to get into the championship in all three, and that is exactly what I managed to do. So, I am in the championship in all three of my leagues. It's a 100% hit ratio. I'm feeling really good. So we will break it down here. My 10 team standard ESPN league. This is the league that I sneaked into the playoffs as a sixth seed. I was 6-7 on the year. So I had some injuries, had some bad loss stretches, but I was able to win the last couple of weeks and play my way back into the playoffs. And I felt decent about my team in the playoffs. I felt like I was built for the playoffs. I had some really good matchups coming in, and that is exactly how it turned out. I was the high point scorer in the whole league this past week. Yeah, my leaders across the board were Lamar Jackson at quarterback, who I traded for mid-season because of his playoff schedule, so that is paying off. And then I had Josh Jacobs. He got me started off well on Thursday. Even though it wasn't the most efficient game, he was able to get in the end zone. And then I have Zeke, who I acquired, but I also handcuffed him with Pollard like a month ago. And then when Zeke was out, I threw Tony Pollard in, and he was amazing. So Tony Pollard, and then my third running back was David Johnson. He came back, and he was the only show in town for the Houston Texans, and he was awesome. So yes, I was high point scorer. Fantastic week. So I'm in the championship in that league. In my 12 team Superflex league, I was also the high point scorer. I had Josh Allen as my main quarterback in that league. It is a two quarterback league, so I ended up playing Stafford because he was deemed okay to go. He did get sat in the fourth quarter, probably because of injury, probably out of an abundance of caution. So it was either him or Gardner Minshew. That's who I was deciding between. They scored like the same, so it doesn't matter. And then I had Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and David Johnson in that league also. So great week there. And then my Reality Sports Online league, which is like a dynasty style league, I was second in my division. I felt really good coming into the season that I could push for a title this year. It's always hit or miss on dynasty style leagues, whether it's going to be a rebuild year for you or if you are going to try to win the championship. And I felt good about my team. And then Dak Prescott got hurt. He was my leader. I had the Prescott to Amari Cooper stack as one of my cores. So when Prescott got hurt, I was a little down. I did make a move because I believed in my team. I traded a future first round pick to acquire James Robinson, and I have not looked back. So I was able to slide into the playoffs. Well, actually, I didn't slide into the playoffs. I was able to slide into the championship. I played in the semis. I played the guy who was the two-time defending champion, so he had won the last 2 years in a row. I wasn't super hopeful, but it's a two quarterback league in that, and he did start Derek Carr. Derek Carr went down with injury, which gave me the opening I needed. And then Tannehill dropped 45 points for me, which was fantastic. David Montgomery's a stud for me. James Robinson I left in. And then it came down to yesterday, Monday night. I needed 7.5 points combined from Chase Claypool and Chris Boswell. If you watched the Monday night game, I was not feeling good after the first half. I had 0 points between the two of them. Pittsburgh was getting shut down by the Cincinnati Bengals, and it really looked like they weren't going to be able to turn it around. Luckily, in the second half, Claypool came out, made a couple long catches. He almost broke off a 55-yard touchdown, which would have ended it right there. It turned into a 37-yard gain or something like that. He had a couple more catches. Boswell kicked a couple extra points and a field goal. got me in. I won by 4, so I am in the championship in that league as well. I know other people who were relying on Pittsburgh Steelers did not fare so well. They did not pull out the win like I did, which goes into our listener. So Jonathan wrote in, and he said that he went into Monday night only needing 2.3 points from Eric Ebron in a full PPR. So he just needs one catch for 13 yards or anything that is greater than that. Yikes. If you watched the game, you know that Eric Ebron left in the first quarter with an injury. He was carted off the field, and he did not make a catch before he left with injury. He got a 0 for you. And Jonathan, I am sorry that your season ends like that. I thought I was going to have a similar result where I lost because Claypool and Boswell couldn't combine for 7.5 points against the Bengals. So that is a very tough break. I am sorry. Hopefully you can come back next year, and hopefully you don't let this tilt you and you can still get third place in your league. So we will move next into our normal Tuesday segment. It is high flying or nose diving. So the high flying quarterback for this week is Jalen Hurts. I think Hurts is going to be a special kind of quarterback like Lamar Jackson, and he might even end up being a little better than Lamar if he continues his impressive passing work. He threw for 338 yards and 3 touchdowns while adding 63 rushing yards and another touchdown on 11 carries. So he was QB1 in some formats, QB2 in some formats. So it just depends what your scoring format is. But either way, he was basically the top quarterback on the week. And he was someone you probably picked up on waivers like a week or two ago. And if you played him in your semifinals, you were rewarded. I can't see benching him next week. But going forward next year, I think Hurts should be the starter in Philly. And he's going to be the Lamar from last year or the Kyler from this year. He's going to be a later round quarterback that you draft and you reap the reward with a crazy rushing floor. So keep an eye on Jalen Hurts. If you were lucky enough to pick him up, I think you play him in your championship round, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. If you picked him up, he's a lock in any 2 quarterback leagues. If you picked him up in a single quarterback league, or maybe it's like a 10-team league and you already had a really good quarterback, it might be a tough decision there. But chances are Jalen Hurts should be in your lineup. My nose diving quarterback is Ben Roethlisberger. He came out a couple days ago and said that he would like to play next year. I think this is the last year on his contract, so he would have to be re-signed. I assume he's going to be a free agent. I don't think anybody is going to want the version of Big Ben that we've seen lately, especially last night's horrendous performance against the Bengals and their third string quarterback. Ben Roethlisberger got outplayed by a third string quarterback on the Bengals, the 2-10-1 Bengals, now 3-10-1. I doubt Ben is in Pittsburgh next year. I've even seen some speculation out of Pittsburgh that they might acquire Matthew Stafford for their quarterback going forward. The Detroit Lions are cleaning house. They got rid of their GM and Matt Patricia. They're probably looking for a rebuild. Whether they keep Stafford or not, I don't know. I can see a new regime coming in and wanting their own guy. Stafford's not a super young quarterback, but he's not super old either. He has a good amount of run left in him, and he's a tough guy. And I think Stafford would be a good fit in Pittsburgh. I really do. With all those weapons, Stafford could be a great fantasy quarterback next year with Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool and Juju. I assume Pittsburgh will draft a running back. So yeah, we'll have to see, but hopefully you weren't relying on Big Ben in any 2 quarterback league this week. I can't imagine anybody starting him in a single quarterback league. So if you did that, I'm sorry. And if you were in a 2 quarterback league and Big Ben was what you were relying on to get to your championship game last night, I am sorry about that as well. Don't plan on playing Big Ben in your championship game. I doubt anybody who has Big Ben is in the championship game, or if anybody was playing Big Ben, I doubt you're in the championship game. But yeah, either way, don't plan on playing him in week 16. My high-flying running back is David Montgomery. So it was a very slow start to the season. There was a lot of hype around Montgomery coming in this year. He's in his sophomore season. Last year, he looked pretty good. He's a volume-based back. He should be a full workhorse. And then he kind of disappointed to start the season. But he's turned it on lately, and he's personally carried me to the championship game in my Reality Sports Online League. He's like the RB2 or something over the last 4 weeks. Maybe he's RB1 now. But just to put it in context, he scored 110 fantasy points in his last 4 games, whereas he scored 104 points in his first 10 games this season. So he has just dominated the last 4 weeks. He's a true workhorse back, and hopefully they don't bring anybody into the backfield next year like Tariq Cohen or some other change of pace back that's going to eat into his passing work a lot, because David Montgomery's shown that he can handle the passing work. He can be a 3 down workhorse running back, and he's been good for the Bears. So hopefully they don't screw that backfield up next year, and David Montgomery is just as good for me next year as he has been this year. Obviously, he's in your lineup for week 16, and like I talked about a couple weeks ago, he had a great um, schedule through the playoffs, so he should have been in your lineup anyways. This is just me affirming that David Montgomery is a stud, and hopefully next year he can be a stud as well. My nose diving running back is Kareem Hunt. I was wary of the Baltimore game pulling people back in. Last week I talked about Hunt being a fantasy liability over the back half of the season outside of the Baltimore game last week, which he saw his lowest carry total. He just happened to get 77 yards and rushed in a goal line touchdown. He's not getting the same type of workload that he was at the beginning of the season. And even in a solid matchup against the Jets this week, I am personally not playing Kareem Hunt in my Reality Sports Online League. I didn't play him this past week. If you remember last week, I talked about how I had a lot of depth at running back with Dave Montgomery, James Robinson, Kenyon Drake, Cam Akers, and Kareem Hunt, and I had to pick 3 of them to play. I ended up benching Kareem Hunt and Cam Akers. Uh, it, Kareem Hunt, Cam Akers, and Kenyon Drake all ended up scoring basically the same anyway, so there wasn't really a right choice out of those. I'm glad that I stuck with James Robinson in the tough Baltimore matchup, and obviously stayed with David Montgomery because he's on fire lately. So I'm glad I stayed with my 2 studs there that had carried me to the championship, and I didn't get caught up in chasing the Cam Akers or Kareem Hunt points from the week prior. I am not playing Kareem Hunt in my championship matchup. I'm probably going to keep Kenyon Drake in. Cam Akers is out with a high ankle sprain now, so he's out. I'm probably not playing Kareem Hunt, though. I'm probably just going to roll with Drake again. He was on a 4 game streak of touchdowns. Kenyon Drake was until this past week. He broke that, so hopefully he can get back into the end zone. I just don't trust Kareem Hunt's workload right now. My high-flying wide receiver is Corey Davis. He's been just as good and just as involved as A.J. Brown this season. He just hasn't caught quite as many touchdowns, so it's a huge bounce-back campaign for Davis, who most people wrote off as a bust. Corey Davis, through his first couple seasons in the league, was labeled as a bust. He did not perform for the Titans. He definitely did not perform for fantasy. But this year has kind of been a resurgence of Corey Davis. Like I said, he's just as involved as A.J. Brown. He just doesn't have as many touchdowns. But you saw again this past week, he caught a 75-yard bomb touchdown. Last year, that was exclusively going to A.J. Brown. So Corey Davis is eating into A.J. Brown a little bit. A.J. Brown did get into the end zone again. He scored in 9 out of his 12 games played this year or something. So don't worry about A.J. Brown. I'm just saying Corey Davis is a legit play, and this is something to keep in mind for next season. For this week, I would stick with the guy who's hot and leave Corey Davis in my lineup for championship week. I really would. If you have Corey Davis, you probably have been playing him the last couple weeks. Keep him in week 16. My nose diving wide receiver is Adam Thielen. He's been solid for your fantasy team all year, but it's been predicated on 13 touchdowns, and 10 of those 13 touchdowns have come from within the red zone. So he is clearly their top red zone target. You can't take that away from him, but you've seen him lose yardage and targets to Justin Jefferson, who I think is the guy Cousins goes to when they need to move the chains. So in the red zone, yes, Adam Thielen is probably the first read, as indicated by his 10 red zone touchdowns this season. But if he doesn't get a touchdown this past week, you're left with 2 catches for 11 yards or 1 catch for 11 yards. That's not what you want to count on. And then 2 weeks ago, he only had 4 catches for 30 yards. So Thielen is a risky touchdown-dependent play against New Orleans this week. And I think you could end up with yardage totals like the last couple of weeks, like 30 yards, 10 yards. And if he doesn't get a touchdown, you're going to be settling for a runner-up in your 2020 championship games. My high-flying tight end is Darren Waller. last week I highlighted Travis Kelce. This week I'm highlighting Darren Waller. He is a stud at the position, and you're obviously starting him no matter what, but he is for sure a top 3 pick next year. I think he has solidified himself in that tier with Kelce and Kittle, the top 3 locked in tight end guys. He has separated himself from Mark Andrews, who I would still put at 4, but Waller is probably worth the early round pick next year, just like Kelce and Kittle are this year. For somebody who is a little less obvious of a high flying tight end, I'm going to also point out Logan Thomas. He came out and saw 17 targets from Dwayne Haskins, which turned into 13 catches for 101 yards. I did not see this coming when Dwayne Haskins was named the starter with Alex Smith out. I said to avoid to avoid Washington football team pass catchers. Um, in the first half of the season, Dwayne Haskins didn't really look Logan Thomas's way outside of like one game, which was the first week, and everyone was on fire for Logan Thomas then because he's a super athletic tight end. And then Dwayne Haskins just couldn't get it to him. He got him some decent targets, but he could not connect with him. He was missing Logan Thomas a lot, but 17 targets, that'll get the job done. 13 catches, only 101 receiving yards on 13 catches, but how can you complain? In any kind of PPR format, Logan Thomas was like a stud tight end this week. So if you ended up playing him in your semifinal matchup, kudos to you. And if you manage to get to the championship game playing any combination of like Noah Fant, Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz, or Irv Smith Jr. this season, like I did in my 12-team Superflex League, you might want to consider picking up Logan Thomas, who's probably available on waivers, and play him this week in your championship game. My nose diving tight end is Evan Engram. He has the same amount of catches and yards on the season as Robert Tonyan, which is crazy. But Tonyan has 10 touchdowns this season compared to Engram's 1 touchdown. So it's a combination of poor play from Engram and a poor offensive unit from the Giants. But Evan Engram has been a big bust this season. It's not like he had super high expectations. He's been super injury prone his entire career. But he was drafted as like a top 10 tight end probably, and you were hoping that he could show out this season and stay healthy, and only if Evan Engram could stay healthy, he would be a top 5 locked in tight end. Well, he's been healthy, and he has been a far cry from a top 5 tight end. So don't be tempted to pick him up on waiver wire this week because he will probably be out there, and he has the name recognition, but do not trust him in week 16. If your tight end gets COVID or goes down to injury, look elsewhere. Look to Logan Thomas. We'll talk about another tight end name in the waiver wire section. Just don't look to Evan Engram. Speaking of the waiver wire section, we will move into straight fire from the waiver wire. I'm going to talk about a running back, wide receiver, tight end that I would grab this week and play, and then maybe some other options that are considerations if you're really desperate. Hopefully, you can just, if you need a plug and play, you can get my top guy. If not, the other guys aren't super good. And if you're in the championship game, you're probably set except for maybe one flex play, or if someone goes down, or if you just want a backup or some depth. But hopefully the other section you aren't really counting on this week. And if you're in the championship, chances are your team is solid and you don't have to do that. So my top target at running back, and the running back that I would pick up and play immediately, barring a certain circumstance, is Tony Pollard. So as I said, I own Tony Pollard in my 10-team standard league. Yep, where I own Zeke. I handcuffed him with Pollard like as soon as I traded for Zeke mid-season. So Pollard's just been on my bench. I ended up playing him in that league once Zeke was ruled out, and I also played him in my 12-team Superflex league when Zeke got ruled out. I picked up Pollard like a month ago in that league, or a couple weeks ago in that league, just because Antonio Gibson was hurt, David Johnson was on IR, and my once strong running back core was looking pretty thin. So I just picked up Pollard in case anything happened to Zeke and I could have a good starting running back. I actually ended up playing Pollard. I switched him in for David Johnson at the last second. I think I mentioned earlier in the congratulate or commiserate section that I played David Johnson in both leagues. I didn't do that. I played Tony Pollard in both leagues. I subbed him in for David Johnson at the last second once Zeke was ruled out in my 12-team Superflex league. So yes, if you had Tony Pollard and you played him, you were greatly rewarded. He scored more fantasy points for a single week than Zeke has done in 31 games. So you have to go all the way back to sometime in 2018 for Zeke to have had a game like this. Tony Pollard is explosive. He runs with more power and quickness than Zeke. And if I was the Cowboys, I'd just kind of want to leave him on the field and see what he can do. Pollard was widely available before the Zeke news broke. And if he wasn't scooped up in your leagues, which he might not have been because half the teams are probably not paying attention to the playoffs. They're probably not making waiver wire moves because they're out already. So he might still be out there. If he is, get him. He's a top 10 running back if Zeke is out again this week, and he's a flex play at worst if Zeke is active. Just to give you insight into my plans in my 10-team standard league, if Zeke is active, I'm probably not playing Zeke or Pollard. I have Josh Jacobs. Hopefully Ronald Jones comes back off the COVID list, and then David Johnson. I would roll with those three. If Zeke is out, because Las Vegas is playing a tough Miami defense, I would probably bench Josh Jacobs and play Tony Pollard, Ronald Jones against Detroit, and David Johnson against Cincinnati. So I'm kind of hoping that Zeke is out and I can not rely on the super touchdown dependent Josh Jacobs against a tough Miami defense, and I can just roll with Pollard again. Other running backs to consider, Le'Veon Bell, he's actually a decent pickup. He should lead the Chiefs' backfield with Clyde Edwards-Helaire likely to miss a couple of weeks. He had a bad-looking injury. He couldn't put any weight on his left leg as he got assisted off the field. And the Chiefs, obviously, one of the best offenses in football. So if you have their starting running back, it's a decent play. Bell's probably an RB2 this week. So I guess Pollard and Bell would be two plug-and-play options. Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson are both dealing with injuries that they sustained last week, but Wilson he might still be available in your leagues. Mostert's definitely not available. But if Wilson is available, I would pick him up, or maybe Tevin Coleman if you're desperate and you can hope that Mostert and Wilson both miss, and then Tevin Coleman's the lead back. Malcolm Brown, he might become more relevant again with Cam Akers dealing with that high ankle sprain like I mentioned earlier. So Malcolm Brown's probably available. Darrell Henderson is a lot less likely to be available, but check him out see if he's on your waiver wires. And then finally, Sony Michel. He was pretty good this past week with Damian Harris out with an ankle injury. He had like 10 carries for 74 yards, so averaging over 7 yards per carry. Solid work from Sony Michel. If Damian Harris is back, obviously don't play Sony Michel. My top wide receiver to grab, and the only plug and play that I would consider is Rashard Higgins. I talked about him last week. He's been very good for the Browns as of late. He has over 65 yards in 4 of his last 5 games and touchdowns in 2 of his last 3. The Browns get to play the Jets this week, so the matchup and volume dictates that Higgins is a solid flex play for a more desperate championship roster out there. Chances are, if you're in the championship games, hopefully you have good wide receiver depth or running back depth where you don't have to flex Higgins. But if you do have to flex Higgins and Pollard is out, he's not available, and Le'Veon Bell isn't available on your waivers, Rashard Higgins is my next choice. Other wide receivers, Russell Gage has been decent since Julio has been injured. Gage has double-digit fantasy scores in 3 straight weeks. So one of those weeks, though, he threw a touchdown pass, so hard to predict that. Outside of that, it's slim pickings at wide receiver. But Tyrone Johnson, he could be viable again if the Chargers continue to miss Mike Williams and if Keenan Allen isn't healthy all the way. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully you're in the championship, you have a solid roster, and you don't have to resort to Tyrone Johnson in your championship game. My top tight end is Austin Hooper. He caught his 3rd touchdown of the season this past week, and he went over 40 yards for the first time since his appendectomy about a month and a half ago. Like Higgins earlier, the matchup against the Jets puts Hooper in automatic stream consideration for me for Week 16, and he's the best tight end available on most people's waiver wire. I might be picking him up in my 12-team Superflex League. Like I said, I've been playing a hodgepodge of tight ends. It's like tight end roulette on my team. Luckily, I have Josh Allen and Derrick Henry, and AJ Brown and Justin Jefferson. Like, my team is stacked outside of tight end, so it hasn't really hindered me at all. I was the high scorer for the year. I got the first round bye. I beat my opponent by 40 last week and outscored the other two playoff teams still by 40. Um, so it hasn't hindered me that much. I'm probably going to try to pick up Hooper, and I will probably play him over Dallas Goedert this week in the championship. Hopefully, my running back core and Josh Allen can continue to dominate for me like they've done all season long. Other tight ends to consider? None. I have no other tight ends to consider. If you're in the championship, chances are that you have the tight end position taken care of, unlike myself. And even if I can't get Austin Hooper, I'm just going to roll with Dallas Goedert out there again. Goddard did have 8 targets from Jalen Hurts. He led the team in targets, and he dropped a touchdown. So Goddard's a solid option still, and I'll probably roll with him if I can't get Austin Hooper. And we will conclude with my favorite quarterback streamers of the week. Mitchell Trubisky is against Jacksonville, who gives up the most points in the league. Their defense is just terrible. And I think I'm going to start Mitchell Trubisky over Kirk Cousins as my second quarterback in my Reality Sports Online League. I've been rolling with Tannehill and Cousins pretty much exclusively since Dak Prescott got hurt. But Kirk Cousins is playing New Orleans this week. It's going to be a tough matchup, and Trubisky has been pretty good. He's thrown for 8 touchdowns, I think, in the last 3 weeks. Last week was a little rough. He did get the job done. They won the game. He did lose a fumble, I think, and throw a pick. And he only had 1 touchdown last week. But before that, he had 3 touchdowns in consecutive weeks. So, yeah, I'm going to roll with Mitch Trubisky over Kirk Cousins in my Reality Sports Online League. If you're brave enough, come ride the Trubisky roller coaster with me. And I will say, in championship week, this is only like a 2 quarterback play. If you're in a single quarterback league, hopefully you're not like that desperate and streaming quarterbacks in your championship game. But if you are, Mitch Trubisky is widely available, and he is my favorite streamer available on waivers. Yeah. Second option, Tua gets to play struggling Las Vegas defense. He's been pretty good. He had a couple rushing touchdowns this past week. So you could do worse than Tua. And finally, Jared Goff. He has another pristine matchup against Seattle to finish out the playoffs. Like I talked about a couple weeks ago, Jared Goff having a good stretch in the playoffs, a good schedule run in weeks 15 and 16 especially. But he didn't really take advantage of a great matchup last week against the Jets, and they ended up losing that game. So you can stream Goff if you're super desperate because of the matchup, but he's risky because he hasn't been taking advantage of great matchups. And that will conclude the Tuesday episode. My full model rankings for Week 16 Championship Week should be available on Wednesday evening. I'm going to try to get them up for Thursday, just because Thursday's Christmas Eve. I know people have holiday plans. I myself have holiday plans. So I will try to get those rankings up on Wednesday evening and keep updating them throughout the weekend through the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday games. Those will be available on the website. It is thefantasyfootballactuary.com. If you want to watch video versions of this podcast, this episode, or any future episodes, you can go to the YouTube channel. It is The Fantasy Football Actuary. If you are watching on YouTube, I just ask that you hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the podcast grow. It helps me reach more people. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it is @TheFFActuary. So I know I generally do a Tuesday episode and a Saturday episode. I am not going to do a Saturday episode this weekend because it is a holiday weekend. So I will be spending time with my family. I won't have time to record a podcast, but I will keep my model up to date, my modeled rankings up to date on the website. So be sure to check those out before kickoffs on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'll keep those updated. And then I will be back on Tuesday for another congratulate or commiserate. Hopefully I have 3 championship trophies in hand. And then I'll talk about what my future plans are for the offseason and stuff next week. So enjoy the holidays. Merry Christmas and good luck in your championships. And until next time, keep crunching those numbers.